Welcome to the webinar Treating Perimenopausal Bleeding. Can we really save the uterus always? A knowledge sharing initiative by Jackson Pal with Lalita Memorial Hospital Infertility Center, Rewari, supported by Rewari Obs Gynae Society. On behalf of Jackson Pal Pharmaceuticals Limited, makers of Cyclorex CR10, norethinosterone acetate 10 mg with embedded polymer matrix technology, Jepitone iron syrup enriched with zinc and vitamin B helps you say no to anemia. And progesterone sustained release tablets as Divagest SR 200 and 300. I'm Dr. Vipin Tyagi along with my teammates Dr. Deepika Chavda and Mr. Amit Saxena. Thanks convener and moderator Dr. Seema Mittal for organizing this webinar. Dr. Seema Mittal is Director, Lalita Memorial Hospital Infertility Center, Rewari, Infertility and Endoscopy Specialist, past President ROGS. Welcome all the esteemed faculty present with us today. We thank ICOG for the accreditation of one ICOG point to all attendees of this webinar. Welcome to all attendees. Please post your queries by text in Q&A box to be answered at the end. Please note this webinar is streaming on Facebook Live. The recording will remain on Jackson Pal's YouTube channel for reference and promotion. I will now request Dr. Seema Mittal ma'am kindly initiate the session.
Thanks, Dr. Vipin. Friends, menopause is the time when ovaries stop functioning. It becomes very difficult for us to decide certain management guidelines. So, to discuss on the very important subject, we have now speakers and panelists to share their views from which we all can make our own guidelines and proceed. Friends, for today's evening, we have the most wonderful, respectful, and helpful, and the most knowledgeable speaker for this evening, and who is the person who has taken Foxy to new heights. And as Dr. Sadhna was saying, that in his leadership, first e-voting was done in Foxy elections, and that was very successful. And we feel privileged and proud to have you with us, sir. And I request Dr. Surekha Yadav, President, Rewari of Gynae Society, to introduce sir. Over to you, Dr. Surekha.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I have the privilege to introduce Dr. Jaideep Tank, and he is the Secretary General for Federation of Obs and Gynae Society. He was the immediate past President Mumbai Obs and Gynae Society, and he chaired International Federation of Obstetrics and Gynecology FIGO Committee for Safe Abortion. He is Deputy Secretary, Asia Oceania Federation of Obstetrics and Gynae, AOFOG. He was awarded the FRCOG honorary course in 2020 by Royal College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists, and he has chaired many sessions and committees. He chaired MTP committee Foxy from 2004 to 2009. Thank you, sir. It's so nice. It's a real privilege for me to introduce you, and I welcome you to this session. And Dr. Jaideep will be talking about postmenopausal bleeding management. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Surekha, for that very, very kind and generous introduction. And it's time for me to ask the two most famous questions since the lockdown began. Are my slides seen and am I audible?
Slides are not yet seen, sir.
Yes, yes, the slideshow is there, sir. The flyer has been put up.
That's right. I have put it up. That's the first slide. Yes. Okay. Thank you. And I'm audible?
Yes, sir. Very well.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Seema. So let me first begin by thanking Dr. Seema Mittal, someone I have known for a while now, and who has been a very cooperative president of the Rewari Society in the past, for putting this whole program together and inviting me to speak on this very important topic, which is perimenopausal bleeding and whether we can really save the uterus always. I would also like to thank Dr. Surekha Yadav, the current president, for that very kind, warm and generous introduction. Dr. Sunita Bijarnia, who is going to chair the session along with Dr. Surekha, and then the very eminent panelists, Dr. Sadhna Gupta, Parul and Dr. Charu Modi. So thank you very much again, Seema, for having me here. And I must
sir.
also acknowledge the secretary of the Rewari Society. I am a secretary general of FOPSI, so I must acknowledge
Yeah.
the secretary of whichever society I am speaking in. And Dr. Neeraj Yadav, thank you very much for all the cooperation from the Rewari Society. So we are going to essentially talk on treating perimenopausal bleeding. And it's always quite fascinating as a physician and also as a man, if I may say so, to speak about menstruation, because menstruation has been shrouded by myth and mystery since really, an eternal time. In fact, if you look at what Pliny the Elder said, vines sours if they pass, vines wither, grass pales and buds are blasted. Should a menstruating woman sit under a tree, the fruit will fall, a looking glass will discover, a knife will turn blood, bees will die, and dogs tasting her blood run mad. Quite an exaggeration, I'm sure you will agree. But, it is surprising how many people actually subscribe to the myths around menstruation. You can look at that very recent clipping from the newspaper, which says that women in a state like Maharashtra are still plagued by menstrual myths. And if you look at all the restrictions or exclusions that are incumbent upon menstruating women, you should soon realize that this is not an isolated problem. It's actually quite a significant problem, and all this, as I said, is due to the myths and the mystery of menstruation. Menstruation seems to be surrounded with fears, misunderstandings, myths, discrimination. It's heavily influenced by the male fear of this mysterious process, because a lot of males, due to the lack of menstrual hygiene education or sexual education or sex education, you may call it what you may, still don't understand menstruation too well, and because of this, the myths persist commonly into modern times. Surprisingly enough, there is still a rarely discussed phenomenon within the general community. Among social media, Instagram, Twitter, you can see a lot of discussion around this, but let's remember that all this does not affect a very, very large amount of the general population. I quite like, this whole description of the discrimination of women because of menstruation, with this couplet by Parth Bishnoi, who said that no one saw that blooded body as they were passing nearby, but everyone noticed those small blood stains on her skirt. So these are the talking points about this presentation on perimenopausal bleeding. We'll first look at a little bit at the nomenclature which surrounds perimenopausal bleeding, abnormal uterine bleeding, and so on. We'll talk a little bit about investigations, treatment, and then delve a little into the hysterectomy controversy and the role which FOPSI played, particularly in the state of Maharashtra, as far as this hysterectomy controversy was considered. Of course, I will try and restrict myself to around 20 to 22 minutes in the presentation, and hope that this presentation serves as a good base from which the panel discussion can be launched. So, is perimenopausal bleeding, abnormal perimenopausal bleeding, really a problem? And you have to look at it in the context of menstrual disorders in developing countries. If you look at this paper on the epidemiology of menstrual disorders in developing countries, and you look at that column which says abnormal uterine bleeding and dysmenorrhea and menstrual problems, it is rather obvious that it is indeed a fairly widespread kind of problem. Of course, the terminologies which have been used to describe different types of abnormal uterine bleeding has caused much confusion. To paraphrase from Shakespeare, in this instance, a rose by any other name does not smell as sweet. You have to call it by the current modern technology, and this has important implications because it has implications on accurate communication, understanding and application of results in research publications, the design and execution of clinical trials, and of course, education and training. It's therefore very important to look at the nomenclature of abnormal uterine bleeding in the modern context. and do away, if it's possible, with several words which mean the same thing: menorrhagia, metrorrhagia, DUB, hypermenorrhea, menometrorrhagia, polymenorrhea. There is really quite a lot of confusion. And these terms which are commonly used are ill-defined. The usage actually appears to vary across oceans and countries, within the same country, and sometimes within the same institutions. You will sometimes in medical colleges and in other private hospitals have different units referring to the same problem with different names. And obviously this creates a problem with communication. For example, if you look at the literature and this quite fascinating study by Woolcock, Fraser, and Monroe, they looked at the use of the term menorrhagia in 100 consecutive papers, and they found that even at that time in 2008, menorrhagia was either used as a symptom or as a diagnosis. It was used for regular bleeding, for irregular bleeding, where there was pathology and where there was no pathology. Obviously, if you have literature which is so heterogeneous, it is impossible to make comparisons and recommendations on the basis of this kind of literature. You therefore need to arrive at a standard AUB nomenclature, and I think that the FIGO Committee on Menstrual Disorders has done outstanding work and tried to simplify and distill down the basics of nomenclature. So this is the terminology that we are supposed to use in terms of volume. We are supposed to say heavy, normal, and light. In terms of regularity, irregular, regular, and absent. In terms of frequency, frequent, normal, and infrequent. In terms of duration, prolonged, normal, and shortened. And then there is the other category where there is bleeding, either intermenstrual, premenstrual, postcoital, or unscheduled bleeding with the use of sex steroids. So the question which comes with all this is that if you say normal volume, what do you mean by normal volume? And this is really the question which has been vexatious. In fact, I remember reading Jeff Coates' textbook in my undergraduate as well as postgraduate days, and I was surprised to realize that our understanding of the menstrual cycle and what we have taken as normal all these years, which is around 28 to 30 days, has been arrived at after a calculation of only 700 odd menstrual cycles in a very old study from the 50s and 60s. So it is no wonder that adolescents and their families often have difficulty understanding what the normal cycles or patterns of bleeding are. And of course, in particular, in the adolescent years, there is a considerable amount of variability. So if we want to say normal, then what is normal? Regular ovulatory menstrual cycles occur every 21 to 35 days. So that's your interval. And if it is less frequent than that, then it is infrequent. And if it is more frequent, it is more frequent. They last up to 7 days with an average blood loss of 25 to 69 ml. So this is the current consensus on what are normal menstrual cycles: 21 to 35 days, up to 7 days, and an average blood loss of 25 to 69 ml. Many patients who complain of menstrual problem actually fall within normal variation. Sometimes it's quite a task explaining to a patient who gets periods regularly for 3 to 4 days, but gets them every 32 to 34 days. It's quite a task, to explain to her that don't worry, this is normal. And sometimes, sometimes one feels that, okay, let's give her OCs for 2-3 months so that she gets regular periods. But of course, you can't do that. You have to take time, you have to counsel the patient and tell her that this is normal and she doesn't need any treatment for that. In the first year of the menarche, 40% of cycles are anovulatory, but 80% still fall in the normal range. By the third year of menarche, 95% of menstrual cycles fall into this range. In fact, it's a very good idea to give patients a menstrual calendar. And nowadays, with all the proliferation of apps, there are a lot of menstrual cycle apps which can track the menstrual cycle. Only the cycles that fall outside of this norm should be evaluated for any underlying pathology. This is a publication which is freely available on the internet. It's from the IJGO of 2018. And I found this little chart to be quite helpful And in fact, sometimes you may even give it to the patient in the beginning to fill it, so that a complicated menstrual history sometimes becomes quite easy. So what they say is, in terms of frequency, they have added amenorrhea now to the frequency category. And if there is no bleeding, then that patient has amenorrhea. If it is infrequent, then that's more than 38 days. Normal is between 24 to 38 days, and normal and frequent is less than 24 days. So 21 to 35, or let's say 24 to 38. The duration of the period, normal is less than or equal to 8 days, prolonged is more than 8 days. I'd like you to note that in the duration, there is nothing like a scanty period, because a scanty period does not fall into the definition of AUB. We get sometimes a lot of patients who come to us and say, Doctor, I'm bleeding okay, but my bleeding is very less compared to what it used to be earlier. And so what I always tell them is that, have you ever heard of a medicine to increase your blood flow? And if there is no medicine to increase your blood flow, it stands to reason that a reduced amount of bleeding is actually not a pathology. I'm not really talking about patients who have Asherman syndrome or intrauterine adhesions or that kind of a thing, but just in terms of patients who are not seeking fertility. Regularity, normal or regulation, shortest to longest cycle variation around 7 to 9 days, and irregular, where the shortest to longest variation is more than or equal to 8 to 10 days. And flow volume, again, remember this flow volume is determined by the patient and not by you. So I think I always use the CBC as a kind of a corollary to this, and we will be talking about this a little later. So you need to ask the patient where the flow is light, normal, or heavy. And then, of course, there is instrumental bleeding or unscheduled bleeding. And then all these can be ticked, and then you get a fairly concise view of what the menstrual cycle is. Once you have the history of the menstrual cycle established, that is the AUB system 1, then you come to the AUB system 2, again from the FIGO Menstrual Disorders Committee. And what they have done is coined this mnemonic called palm coin. Over there in the corner, you can see my palm and a coin in it. And that is just the way I remember the mnemonic. And they say that abnormal uterine bleeding is essentially AUB or HNB or intermenstrual bleeding. And the structural causes are PALM, that's P for polyp, A for adenomyosis, L for leiomyoma, N for malignancy and hyperplasia. And if it is going to be a non-structural cause, then it's coagulopathy, ovulatory dysfunction, endometrial, iatrogenic, or not yet classified. A fairly easy to remember kind of a classification. Not so easy to remember classification is the FIGO leiomyoma subclassification system. To tell you the truth, I don't use it. I find it quite cumbersome to use. My concern when I see a leiomyoma is the size of the leiomyoma and the position, whether it is submucosal or not. If it is indenting or it's inside the endometrial cavity, the approach is obviously going to be quite different than if it is not indenting the endometrial cavity. So there is this system. It's a very good system, but I personally find it a little cumbersome to use. So if you have a patient who's got perimenopausal bleeding and she comes to you and says, Doctor, I have this complaint, how will you go about? Well, in essence, you have to ask her whether the complaint is less than or more than 3 months. If it is less than 3 months, then it's not chronic AUB, and the approach you take is a little more conservative. You can even observe and see, unless the bleeding is so intense that her hemoglobin has gone down. As I said, I consider hemoglobin and ultrasound to be the cornerstones. I'm giving the presentation away a little bit, but I must say here that when I see a patient of abnormal uterine bleeding, these are the two things that I most sort of rely on for my decision making. So you will have all your investigations initially, your history, your physical examination, and as this article in 2018 says, a complete blood count should be performed on all women with symptom of heavy menstrual bleeding, because the perception of the amount of bleeding is different for different people. What may be very heavy for someone may not be very heavy for another person. There might be a person who's actually passing a lot of clots and is using 10, 12 pads a day, which are fully soaked, and say that, yeah, a little bit more bleeding I have. And there might be someone who used to bleed for 4 or 5 pads a day, now bleeds 6, and then comes to you saying, "Doctor, oh, I'm feeling so weak, and I'm bleeding so heavily, and this and that and the other." So if you want a proper metric of how heavy you think the bleeding is, that is really your CBC. If the initial evaluation suggests a low risk either for coagulopathy, structure, or malignant, then you presume that the patient either has an AUBE or an AUBO. If not, then you need to do further investigations. These investigations, as I've already said, for me, the cornerstone of investigating perimenopausal bleeding or AUB at any age is ultrasound and CBC. Coagulation disorders, etc. Of course, there is a way of screening them. You don't need to do coagulation studies for all these women. Remember, a serum ferritin test should not be routinely carried out. Female hormone testing should not be carried out on women with HMB. Thyroid testing should be carried out only when other signs and symptoms of thyroid disease are present. So if you are suspecting coagulopathy, then please use this chart. This is the initial screening for an underlying disorder of coagulopathy or hemostasis. The patient should have heavy bleeding since menarche. She should have had one of either PPH, surgical related bleeding, or bleeding after dental work, or 2 or more of the symptoms like bruising, epistaxis, frequent gum bleeding, and family history. It's good to keep a small slip of this, on your table, or if you're using a table with glass, just slide it under the glass so that you don't have to actually remember it all the time. Only if the patient is positive for these screenings, then you recommend tests for coagulopathy like partial thromboplastin time, PT, platelet function, and VWF, and so on and so forth. I personally don't screen for coagulopathy on my own. If I find that that patient I have a suspicion of coagulopathy for that patient, I generally would refer the patient to the hematologist, because there are just so many advances in hematology that it's really impossible to keep up with all the advances. Should all patients be offered an ultrasound? The guidelines say no, but personally, I do an ultrasound for almost all patients who have any form of abnormal uterine bleeding for more than 2 to 3 months. The guidelines say that you should do an imaging if the uterus is palpable, there is a mass of unknown origin, or if pharmaceutical treatment fails. If you are going to do an imaging, the best thing to do is an ultrasound. And if that patient is married, then a transvaginal ultrasound is probably the best thing you should do. But remember always that you should always do a transabdominal scan first and then follow that with a TVS. Don't do a TVS only for these kind of patients. Saline infusion sonography is not indicated as a first-line diagnostic tool, nor is MRI, nor is DNC indicated as a diagnostic tool. The question then arises in our mind, how good really is transvaginal ultrasound? And I'd like to present this study to you, which we had published from the Novorossiysk Vardia Maternity Hospital in 1998. The format of this study was, it was done for infertility patients, but it speaks about the efficacy of transvaginal ultrasound. What we did was that we took the patient on the table, we did a TVS, then we did a saline sonography, and in the same sitting did an outpatient hysteroscopy. And therefore, we were able to compare the efficacy of a regular transvaginal ultrasound, a saline hysterography, and a hysteroscopy, because we did everything at the same time. And what we saw was that a well-done transvaginal ultrasound will hardly ever miss anything. You can see that the abnormalities which were missed on TVS and seen on hysteroscopy were probably quite minor or insignificant enough not to have any clinical impact. This was a video of a fibroid and how it is seen on saline sonography. It doesn't seem to be working, doesn't matter. The point here I'm trying to make here is that what you really need to look out for in these kind of patients is fibroids, adenomyosis, and polyps. And it's not always very easy to distinguish between them. But the key message I'd like to give here is that you should be able to say whether these are within the endometrial cavity or are submucosal. Only if they are within the endometrial cavity or they are submucosal will they most of the times be responsible for the problem of that heavy menstrual bleeding. The video started. So you can see here that there is this fibroid and that is seen, and it's a little difficult to make out whether this is within the cavity or not. But then you push some saline and you can see that fibroid is very nicely seen within the endometrial cavity. And sometimes, this really helps you to plan your therapy, because over here now you're very sure that you're going to go in with a hysteroscope and you're going to resect the submucous fibroid, and most likely the patient is going to be absolutely fine. But the biggest worry which patients and their relatives have when they come to you with perimenopausal bleeding is this question: is it cancer? I think I cannot tell you the number of patients who have come to me, have been told that, you better get a hysterectomy done because this is quite likely to be cancer. The actual situation is that a very small minority of these patients will actually have cancer. And I think it's very important to tell them that in the first instance. The best way to know whether there is cancer or no cancer is to do an endometrial biopsy. I don't think there is any substitute to that. So you have a patient who's got perimenopausal bleeding, a thickened endometrium, and a history which is more than 3 months. For me, that is an indication to go ahead and get her endometrium examined by hysteroscopy and by DNC and endometrial biopsy. Remember that if the endometrial thickness is less than 4 mm, the probability of endometrial cancer is less than 1%. But in patients with abnormal bleeding, the same thresholds have very high false positive rates and poor sensitivity. Moreover, with the increasingly good survival rates in breast cancer, you see a lot of patients who are on tamoxifen. And if that patient is on tamoxifen, don't rely on ultrasound. Those patients need a hysteroscopy and a DNC. So the primary role of endometrial sampling is to determine if carcinoma or pre-malignant lesions are present. Quite clearly, however, you will be able to detect cancer or effectively rule out cancer only if you have a global pathology of the endometrium, because if cancer occupies less than 50% of the surface area, then that cancer can be missed by a blind endometrial biopsy. So don't rely only on endometrial sampling unless the patient is either unwilling to undergo or for some reason unable to undergo a proper kind of an endometrial biopsy. So when should you do an endometrial biopsy? You should do it at the time of hysteroscopy. For women who are at high risk of endometrial pathology, like patients with persistent intermenstrual bleeding, women who are taking tamoxifen, for women who have been treated initially and that treatment has been unsuccessful. Remember, always obtain an endometrial sample only in the context of a diagnostic hysteroscopy. Do not offer blind endometrial biopsy to women with HMB. I strongly believe that the era of doing a blind DNC is really something which is now obsolete. Also remember that when you're doing a DNC for this indication, you are doing an investigation. Although they say that DNC works in a very large number of cases to treat the abnormal uterine bleeding, it should not be offered as such. It should not be offered as a therapeutic treatment. You should basically understand why you are offering that to the patient. When you get the report of the histopathology of the endometrium in the perimenopausal age group, you may not always get cancer. You may either get a normal report, you may get hyperplasia, or you can get cancer. And then this whole dilemma starts, because that word hyperplasia, which is used by pathologists, is sometimes quite confusing both to the physician as well as the patient. So in a sense, you need to divide them into hyperplasia, either of low malignant potential or atypical hyperplasia. If it's a low malignant potential, conservative treatment with progesterones and LNG-IUS and repeat biopsy can be offered. If it is atypical hyperplasia, most of the times the patient lands up with a hysterectomy. So again, this is something from earlier publication from the FIGO committee, and again something which is quite useful to have in your history sheets. because you can just tick off what is there and what is not there, and then arrive at a diagnosis quite easily. I know most of us will probably not need this, but for people who are starting off, I think this could really be quite a useful thing. A lot of patients come to you and say that, doctor, I've been bleeding since 10 days, 12 days, I'm feeling very weak and so on and so forth. They have an episode of acute perimenopausal bleeding or acute abnormal uterine bleeding. And these are all the treatment methods that have been suggested. But frankly speaking, what I prefer is a little more androgenic progesterone like norethistérone. I think norethistérone is almost like a wonder drug for the treatment of abnormal uterine bleeding. So we normally give 5 milligrams 3 times a day, or we give up to 15 milligrams in short once a day. And then we find that within 2 to 3 days, unless there are some other problems, the bleeding usually stops. So that's how you arrest an acute episode. If you are looking at a little long-term medical treatment, your first option should be NSAIDs or tranexamic acid. But remember that if you're going to use those as your first line, if your symptoms do not improve after 3 months, then please consider moving to something else. If you're going to use NSAIDs or tranexamic acid, the maximum that you should use it for are 3 menstrual cycles. After that, you can consider the use of combined oral contraceptives, or as I said, norethistérone. Sometimes it's as important to say what not to do than as much as it is to do. So danazol should not be used should not be used routinely for the treatment of HMB. Oral progesterones given during the luteal phase only should not be used, and ethamsilate should not be used for the treatment of heavy menstrual bleeding. Sometimes patients come to you and they find that the hemoglobin is low, it's 6, 7, 8, and then you wonder how to build up the hemoglobin for whatever intervention you have in mind, whether it be a hysteroscopy or a hysterectomy or so on. You will need to use parenteral iron very, very rarely, and you will need to use blood even more rarely. So our threshold for administering blood is 5 grams per cent. If the patient has a hemoglobin of anything which is more than 5 grams per cent of hemoglobin and she's hemodynamically stable, we never use blood. We hardly ever use parenteral iron in these patients because we feel that the rate of rise in the hemoglobin, or the time taken for the hemoglobin to rise, is probably the same with oral iron and parenteral iron. So what we do is we start norethistérone or OC pills depending on what the patient is comfortable with. We give the patient a deworming agent, and that's quite important, believe me. We give iron, protein, and folic acid all together, and we do a hemoglobin every 15 days. Try this, you will be surprised at how well the hemoglobin will go up. The key really is to make sure that she does not menstruate again until the hemoglobin goes up. So continue your norethistérone or OC pills for a prolonged time. You can even give it for 1 or 2 months, there's no problem. And we have used this kind of a thing ever since my father used to practice. So that's like 25 years and more now, and it seems to really work quite well. Of course, the one thing which has brought down our incidence of hysterectomy for abnormal uterine bleeding is the LNG IUS. It's quite a wonder device, I must say, particularly for these patients in the perimenopausal age group. Because if you look at the perimenopausal age group, sometimes there is a need for contraception as well as treatment of the heavy menstrual bleeding. And the LNG IUS is really an excellent fit. I mean, I don't remember the last time I have done a hysterectomy for a normal size uterus with a normal endometrial biopsy. This is our treatment of choice. Our hysterectomy rates have actually gone down because of the use of the LNG IUS. However, 2-3 counseling points. Women who are offered this should be told that this takes some time to act, and for the first few cycles, they will have irregular periods. Don't give up on the LNG IUS easily. It is advisable to wait for at least 6 cycles to see whether this treatment has a benefit or not. Endometrial ablation at one time was all the rage. I remember in workshop after workshop, I used to see TCRE and the heat ablation and this ablation and that ablation. But I think the fad has now gone down a little bit. I have personally never been very fond of this because I believe later on finding out endometrial cancer and even cervical cancer sometimes becomes quite difficult. Of course, the ultimate treatment is hysterectomy. And if you talk about hysterectomy, very briefly, I'd like to say that as far as possible, if you have to do a hysterectomy, it should be vaginal. For me, it always is vaginal first, TLH second, and abdominal hysterectomy third. And I think this is extremely, extremely important. Actually, our incidence of vaginal hysterectomy in practice should be the maximum. Because we are supposed to be the expert vaginal surgeons of the world. And in your own practice also, your incidence of vaginal hysterectomy should be the maximum. I know there are laparoscopic surgeons here who might take, who might object to this, but it is my strong feeling that the vaginal hysterectomy is actually the best hysterectomy if it can be done. Always do a total hysterectomy. Subtotal hysterectomy again was a fad which had come in between, but I think has faded now. And be conservative about the removal of ovaries. We tend not to remove the ovary if the patient is having menses. So if she's having menses, it means that she's got at least 2 years of usable ovarian tissue, and we would not like to deprive her of that. So the Royal College essentially divides when there are fibroids into less than 3 centimeters and more than 3 centimeters. So if it's less than 3 centimeters, they say the LNG-IUS, as I've already said, should be the treatment of choice, along with all the various medical options that are there. If the fibroids are more than 3 centimeters, conservative treatment in any fibroid case only if the fibroid is not submucosal. All submucosal fibroids need treatment. So even if submucosal fibroids are detected accidentally, I would like to treat them because at some point in time, they will start creating a problem. This is an article I had the privilege of writing in 2011 along with Ian Fraser and the FIGO Menstrual Disorders Committee, and we talked about the differences in the management of heavy menstrual bleeding in low and high resource settings. And we pointed out the fact that sometimes policymakers, governmental organizations, and even specialist medical organizations we pay a lot of attention to safe motherhood, contraception, etc. But unfortunately, we sometimes neglect abnormal uterine bleeding, which at the end of the day is also a massive public health problem. So let me end this presentation by talking a little bit about the hysterectomy controversy. And you all must have seen all these newspaper clippings of the hysterectomy controversy which took place in the Bede district. And look at the headlines. Many women in Bede don't have wombs. Bede sees 14 times more hysterectomies and NGOs seek action, and 36% hysterectomies in Bede district. And this was the notice which was received by the gynecologists in the Bede OBGYN Society. So they sent it to me, and I helped them to work. I worked with them with the collector to try and see whether the notice could be taken back. And I think we were successful to some extent. And then the government of Maharashtra set up this committee and asked for a reply from FOXI. So I drafted this reply from FOXI, which was then sent to the office bearers, etc., for approval. And I'd like to point out some fallacies which were present, in all the reporting which surrounded this so-called problem of having hysterectomy. So those essentially were the 5 or 6 articles which talked about this problem of hysterectomy. And I pointed out, to them, and I did a fair bit of research actually. And when I looked at those surveys, I found that one survey had a sample size of 200 and the other had a sample size of 270. Now, actually, the population of Bede, and I went and I looked at the population in our official census website, was 25.89 lakhs. And they were extrapolating this sample size of 200 to that entire 25.89 lakhs. So the first thing we pointed out was that if this was a survey which perpetrated, or which was supposed to be a community level survey, the sample size was quite grossly inadequate. And he said that this is either a deeply flawed survey or there is a deliberate obfuscation of facts, and the findings which should have been restricted to a small population have been incorrectly and deliberately extrapolated to the entire district. So we said that it's better you do a community level survey if you want to say that doctors across the district are actually doing too many hysterectomies. In one of the articles, the survey actually said in 2018, of the 200 women surveyed, 72 had undergone a hysterectomy. And in 2019, out of 271, 56 had undergone the hysterectomy. The next sentence was that the hysterectomy rates has gone up, when a plain reading quite clearly shows that actually the hysterectomy rate had fallen. One of the article claimed that there were 4,500 women who had undergone hysterectomies in 3 years, which meant 1,500 hysterectomy annually. So if again you go back to the census website and you extrapolate this to the census or to the population, it would mean that the population level hysterectomy rate was 0.005, which was actually minuscule. So it was quite obvious that the people were not really interested in the correct data. They just wanted sensationalization. For example, one of the articles suggested that there was a village called Vanzarwadi, and they said that 50% of the women of that village had hysterectomies. So the population, and again I looked up the population of Vanzarwadi in the 2011 census, and the 2011 census data said that the population of Vanzarwadi was 989. So if that newspaper article was correct, which the government had relied on, that would mean there were 247 hysterectomies in Vanzarwadi alone, which of course is impossible because that was 247 hysterectomies in the entire district as per that sample survey. And so, there was no way to avoid a conclusion and say that the issue had actually been reported in a knee-jerk manner, by evoking suspicion about the practice of doctors. Now, this was the letter I had drafted and we had sent to the government, and we said further that it's unfortunate that the lazy narrative of commercialization of medicine in general and the procedure in particular are made the overarching theme rather than looking at social, economic, and other local factors as driving practices. Because the fact of the matter is that within a small population, there was a problem. But instead of addressing that problem in that small population, the government thought that it would be very easy to blame doctors and doctors will take it lying down. So we further wrote that we would not like to presume that hysterectomy rates do not need attention. We are certainly not in favor of doing hysterectomies willy-nilly. And these are all the measures that we suggested that the BEAD authorities could take to make sure that this problem would not occur again. So let me end with one of my favorite slides. And when I showed this slide to my wife, she was quite mightily amused. And you will see why. Because this is a statement from a TV serial called Girl from Paris. And she says, menstruation, menopause, mental breakdown. Notice how all of women's problems begin with men. And, when I speak on menstruation, I always like to show this slide to illustrate that still, at this point in time, men are simply not sensitive enough about this issue. And I think raising awareness about this issue, not only amongst the community, but even amongst physicians is really, really quite important. So thank you very much again for having me here. Thank you very much, Seema, for organizing this quite lovely webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for most relevant and insightful presentation. Definitely, we got to know about the latest research, and definitely we are wiser now and hope to see you more often. And I request our chairperson, Dr. Sunita. Dr. Sunita is consultant at Raj Maternity Hospital, and she's done fellowship in minimal invasive surgery. She's from Jhunjhunu. And this beautiful doctor for ours will now thank Dr. Jaydeep Tanksa for the wonderful presentation, sir. Over to you, Dr. Sunita.
Hello, ma'am.
Hello, yes.
Thank you so much, sir, for such a wonderful presentation and enlightening us for this vast knowledge of yours. And you are doing a lot of things for this community, like menstrual hygiene and many things. Thank you so much for your work to this community and Foxy.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sunita. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It was indeed a pleasure and privilege to have you with us, sir. And we would really be comfortable if all our queries could be answered, because we have to frame certain rules about removing ovaries or not to remove ovaries. And before that, we have 2 poll questions by Dr. Vipin Tyagi. May I request Dr. Vipin to take up those 2 questions?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Dr. Seema Mittal, ma'am. Now, on behalf of Jagsonpal Pharmaceuticals, poll will be conducted. 2 questions will be displayed on your screen one by one. There will be 2 options for each question. I request all panelists and attendees to please participate, and you will have 20 seconds to answer each question. Amitji, please display the question.
Speak out the question.
Oh. Question 1 is, in menopausal conditions for HRT therapy, what molecule do you prefer? And the option 1 is estradiol valrate. Option 2 is CEE, that is conjugated equine estrogens. Okay, so we have the poll result. So 60% audience prefer estradiol valrate in menopausal condition for HRT therapy, while 40% audience says that CEE is a better molecule to prefer. Now can we have the second question, Amitji?
Yes.
So poll question 2 is, for HRT in menopausal women with intact uterus, micronized progesterone is effective in preventing clinically significant depressive symptoms among perimenopausal and early postmenopausal women. You can answer as yes or no.
So what is the result? I think Dr. Jaideep Taksar is here to take the final verdict. Amitji, what is the result? And what does sir say about it?
Yes, now we have the result.
Yes.
And here, according to poll, 58% attendees say that for HRT in menopausal women with intact uterus, micronized progesterone is effective.
No.
No, sorry. Oh, yeah. 42% says that it is 58% says that it is not effective.
Initially also first question you have taken wrong poll actually. You have mismatched the thing. Initially also.
Okay, sir, we have Dr. Jaideep sir and Dr. Sadhna ma'am. So what is your take on this? We just come with the answer. What should be the correct answer for this?
No, I think the panelists should reply. I have just spoken quite a lot.
Actually, Seema, it is not actually it is not a correct. Actually, I say the MCQ medicine should be off a little bit because medicine is all flexible. So conjugated estrogen we have like used a lot and it is in our habit actually, but now with all the things availability of very good estrogen synthetic compound, that is a better choice and we have got a quite a variation in the dose. So my takeaway is for the synthetic estrogen at the present medicine. And the second question, we say you say in the hysterectomized patient, na? Or it was in intact uterus. What
intact
the question? It was hysterectomized patient.
Intact
Intact uterus. So micronized progesterone, yes, it is symptom, but actually the progesterone main role in HRT is to reduce the endometrial hyperplasia. We don't want unopposed estrogen, and it is not about much more about the mood symptom. It is more about the reducing unopposed estrogen action, which is detrimental for many reasons. So this is my takeaway, and we have Parul and Charu. And
I agree with you, ma'am. Agree with you, ma'am. I use conjugated equine estrogen more than estradiol validate at present, but then I agree with you.
Thank you very much, all the faculty present with us for having a good discussion on the topic. And now, ma'am, we would like to continue with the panel discussion.
Yes, and we would like to introduce our worthy panelist, Dr. Sadhna Gupta, ma'am. And ma'am is past president, past VP Foxy 2016. Ma'am has been on various important posts of Foxy, and she has so many awards to her credit. And ma'am at present is director and senior consultant OBGY at Jeevan Jyoti Hospital Medical Research Center and Jeevan Jyoti Advanced Infertility Center. And she's the founder of Trustee Jeevan Jyoti Trust, Gorakhpur. And we have Dr. Parul Gupta with us. Dr. Parul Gupta was the strongest pillar in AICOG and she is consultant OBGY and director RK Medical Center Lucknow and past treasurer Lucknow Menopause Society, and she was the hall chairperson of AICOG 2020 Lucknow. Welcome, Dr. Parul. And we have Dr. Charu, who unfortunately would not be able to join today, and she has also been holding various important posts. And we have with us Jaideep Taksar also, and Dr. Preeti Kumar. I am really thankful to her because she helped us to get the actual jewel of today's evening, Jaideep Taksar, and I hope she's joined, Dr. Preeti Kumar, and Dr. Dipankar sir, if he's here, we would like him to join the panel. And can we have the first question from the panel, Deepika ji?
Seema ji, I'm sorry, but I've just got a call from the other webinar. Will you allow me to leave in around 7 minutes, please?
Maximum 10 minutes, yes, sir. We will
Thank you.
move a little faster, right, sir?
Thank you, madam.
Okay.
No,
So-
take your time. You have excellent panelists. I mean,
Right,
but
sir.
I'll have to leave because they are calling me for the next
So
webinar.
in between, sir, if you can join.
Yes, madam, surely.
Okay. So, sir, what is the ideal age of menopause? And still date, we are not clear. When we were undergraduate, it was 45 years. When we were postgraduates, it's about 49 years. And now it's, 55 years also. So what is the ideal age we should say that this is menopause? I can ask you, sir, few questions before you leave.
Okay, sure. So I don't think menopause is age related, really speaking. It could pretty much occur at any age. I don't think there is anything like an ideal age. They say that if the patient is menstruating beyond the age of 55 years, then that patient may need investigations, but very basic investigations like ultrasound. There is really no need to do endometrial biopsies, etc. So there is no age. I always tell patients that you are not menopausal because you're 50 years old. You are menopausal because you've not had bleeding for 1 year. So it's really, really not age related at all. Of course, there is nothing also like a lower age limit of menopause. Menopause can pretty much occur, at any age. It has implications in terms of fertility, but otherwise, really speaking, besides the need for HRT in a small group of patients, really speaking, there is nothing like an ideal age of menopause. The long-term effects of late menopause, I would say that actually the later the menopause occurs, the better it is, because a menopause which occurs late means that that woman has retained her estrogen for a longer period of time, and the deleterious effects of estrogen deficiency will not be seen. So it's not a very, how would I say, ideal answer, because there is none in this particular instance.
So actually my concern is we get patients who are more than 55 years and they have some associated pathology also, like fibroid or adenomyosis, and then we are not really sure what to do for them, and they are like, some patients are well qualified and they want to retain uterus. So can we tell them that 55 is the cutoff, and since you are 56 and you are bleeding and you have symptoms, you should undergo hysterectomy? Dr. Parul has to say something. Sir,
Yeah,
yes.
I will just say before Parul says that the indication for hysterectomy shouldn't be the presence of fibroids or adenomyosis, rather it should be the symptoms. As far as fibroids and adenomyosis are concerned, if the fibroid is less than 6 or 7 centimeters, I don't really consider it as having any kind of detrimental effect if there are no symptoms. So your association of the pathology has to be with the symptom, not simply the presence or absence of that pathology. So if she's got a fibroid of 15 centimeters and she's 56, well, I would say that a 15 centimeter fibroid should ideally be removed, and the patient should be subjected to a hysterectomy. But if it's anything less than 6 or 7 centimeters, there is no other symptom, no pressure symptom, no heavy menstrual bleeding, her CBC is remaining okay, then there's really no indication to intervene in this particular case. Parul, sorry, please go ahead.
Right. And Dr. Parul, yes.
I was just saying, according to books, the average age of menopause in US is 51 years, ranging from 47 to 53, and average age of menopause in India is 46.2 years. So that is, we are getting old earlier than the US counterparts. And the perimenopausal time is average 4 years, and it can range from few months up till 10 years, maybe 10 years even. And in a patient who doesn't have a uterus, the hot flushes, the mood changes, and the different sleeping patterns and the vaginal dryness can tell us about the menopause age. And it is actually that when her mother has had her menopause, the girl will also, the daughter will also have menopause at the same age, usually.
So our ethnicity that we have got a low MH and we tend to have a little early menopause. Secondly, long-term effect of late menopause, actually, when the patient is having, a woman is having late menopause, we have to be a little careful. I don't say that it is nothing to do. And especially we have to look not fibroid adenomyosis, it's okay, but the endometrial thickness and the other comorbidities, whether diabetic, obesity, other comorbidities, hypertension. And in those cases, I will really take late menopause with the concern and will like to have a look on it, that what is overall her profile and what is the other thing. So these are the 2 points which I wish to communicate.
Right.
You are getting voice? Hello.
See, there are disadvantages of late menopause and advantages of late menopause. Disadvantage remains as in the uterine cancer, the endometrial cancer, and the ovarian and the breast cancer tends to increase. But that happens in a lesser percentage of patients, whereas the longevity of the patient is increased with late menopause. So late menopause is welcome if there is no other associated comorbidity. That is the point. Like the osteoporosis will be less, the cardiac disease will be less, the mood changes will be less, the cognitive changes, the Parkinson, the Alzheimer, everything will be less if there is late menopause. The late menopause has many positive effects if there is no associated comorbidity. That is the thing.
Right. So why I was asking in relation to this question. Next question, yes. 56 years old female, para 2 live, 1 cesarean, and it was a late menarche in her case, and now with 45 days cycle, she has severe dysmenorrhea and excessive bleeding, and when she bleeds after intermittent amenorrhea period, she bleeds for 20 days, 25 days with severe dysmenorrhea and has not responded to hormonal treatment. USG showed multiple fibroids and focal adenomyosis around the endometrium, which was obliterating the cavity. DNC was proliferative, and we had tried all the norethistrone and LNG, but her dysmenorrhea and bleeding, everything persisted. So what should be the ideal treatment for her? She's a doctor and she doesn't want a hysterectomy also. So this question, we can start from Jaideep sir again, sir, because I think you are going to leave after this
Yes.
question. You can answer
Well,
this.
I was actually going to say that a hysteroscopy, because you said DNC, but you've not said hysteroscopy. So
Sir,
I
her
would,
cavity was totally obliterated. It was very difficult to dilate her cervix also. Even the LNG was sort of misplaced in her case.
yeah. So Dr. Seema, it is quite possible sometimes that because the LNG was not placed properly, it didn't work.
Yes,
You
sir.
see, so I would insist on a hysteroscopy for this patient. I know it sometimes gets difficult, but
Right.
2 things one can do is put misoprostol before you do the hysteroscopy around 2 hours. Even in non-obstetric patients, even in gynec patients, it seems to help. And then don't go in with the dilator first. You go in with the hysteroscope first, dilate the cervix with the water because the pressure of the hysteroscopic or the hysteromat is quite a lot. And in most instances, you will be able to enter the endometrial cavity. Once you are able to enter the endometrial cavity, go around properly, don't rush to come out, leave the hysteroscope in for quite some time. And if you do that, you will then be able to dilate. Now, in cases where the endometrial cavity is well and truly obliterated, obviously this obliteration is not because of the fibroid or the adenomyosis. Because if it were because of fibroids or adenomyosis, it should always be possible to distend the cavity. Okay,
Right.
this then becomes a case of Asherman syndrome, and the dysmenorrhea
Why
is
she was
actually
bleeding, sir, then? Sorry to interrupt, sir. She was bleeding so much in spite of those additions.
No, that's what I'm saying. So my
Right.
point here is that this is not Asherman syndrome. This is a cavity on which there is a lot of pressure with the adenomyosis and the adenomyomas and the fibroids. And you should be able to do a hysteroscopy if you follow these couple of things.
Right.
Once you are able to do the
One-
hysteroscopy, you can see whether there is an indentation. If there is an indentation and there are multiple indentations which you cannot tackle, but with a hysteroscope, because it's not always possible. If there are 10 fibroids, I know there are YouTube videos where they remove 10 fibroids, but I don't think it's such a great idea. This patient should either have an LNG-IUS, but her preferred treatment has to be a hysterectomy.
Right, sir.
And if I understand she's a
Actually,
doctor, she
I
will.
really like to interrupt that actually bioscopy, what we are going to achieve in 56 years old, multiple fibroid, a very well done
I agree, Dr. Sadhna, but Seema first
actually
said.
what we are going to achieve in
No,
That
no,
was
no.
my
hysteroscopy.
question, ma'am.
I
Seema,
don't see any
yeah.
reason to go for hysteroscopy. I
Yes,
don't
yes,
see any
madam,
reason.
I agree.
And
But
it's a
my first choice would
simple,
be a
yes.
hysterectomy.
Right.
But Dr. Seema in the beginning said she's a doctor and she doesn't want a hysterectomy.
Right,
That
ma'am.
is
This
why
is my
I proposed the hysteroscopy. I mean, if she's willing for a hysterectomy, then of course
Actually,
hysterectomy is the treatment of choice.
Dr.
I
Parul.
agree. I mean,
Actually,
I would.
hysteroscopy is not going to add whether she is doctor or not, but actually it is not going to. Maybe medical treatment might help a little bit
But she's
for the
already
this
told
thing,
us that it is not
but
responsible.
That
not
is not
the
helpful, ma'am.
hysteroscopy. I don't think, and that is too that difficult hysteroscopy. What all
Yeah.
the tips Jaideep was taking, that difficult hysteroscopy. I
And
will not go to hysteroscopy at all with the endometrial
No,
biopsy.
this is
Yes,
only
Parul,
for
Parul and
patients.
Charu.
Yeah. No, this is
she
only
may
for
expel.
patients who, for some reason, are very adamant. We get patients like this, madam.
Yes.
We get patients who they said no, absolutely not, no hysteroscopy at all. I mean, no hysterectomy at all. You do what you want, but I don't want a hysterectomy. And then you have two choices. You can either refer them to someone else, or you can try hysteroscopy and LNG-IUS along with some other medical treatment for these patients. So thank you again, Seema. I'm sorry, but I must
So-
leave. I've just got one more phone call from the other webinar. Thank you very much again for having me. I'm very sorry.
Thank
I
you,
need
sir.
to.
Thank you. It was
Thank
really pleasure. I wish you could stay for more time. Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you for being
Thank
with us.
you.
Thank you,
Bye.
sir.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Parul. Bye.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank
Dr. Gupta, Sunita. Bye.
Dr. Parul, you will go with the same answer?
Yes, I will go with the hysterectomy answer because in general, she may expel the Mirena later on. Even if you are able to do hysteroscopy, she may expel the Mirena. So what is the point in doing hysteroscopy? Better is hysterectomy.
Hysteroscopy actually nothing with the milk. It is not at all indicated. It is nothing to do. We can go for medical management for a while, like see, but multiple fibroid focal adenomyosis, I don't think so. Parul and Charu, I think, is also there. Now, what's their opinion?
Charu has come.
Because sometimes
Charu is not able to join, doctor. Okay, we can
these
have the
are
next.
the patient actually get benefit from hysterectomy and very good quality of life after hysterectomy.
Yes.
So.
Ma'am, thank you. Saved us from such a big problem. Actually, I have operated on her and she's now comfortable because she was adamant that her uterus would be saved. I said, I cannot. It has to be done. And it's been done actually. And she's now comfortable. I think that was the most important input we got from you. Next question. Next question will be to Dr. Sadhna.
Yes.
Can we have the next question, please? Yes. This is another question. Perimenopausal. See, this is a patient perimenopausal. She's 52 years old, ma'am, and she had a fibroid which was 4 centimeter with menorrhagia and intermenstrual bleeding also. And right ovary was enlarged 49 into 50 mm, and ultrasound and MRI said there were adhesions of the ovary with the surrounding structures. So that was one.
Yes.
So that was one
Mentioned.
alarming sign, like ovaries enlarged and there are adhesions. And she was also previous 2 cesareans. So, ma'am, what should be the management according to you? And would you recommend drug, surgery, or what type of drug? Yes.
Actually, Seema, what we say and what was missed
Ma'am, not audible.
in the Jaideep's presentation also is the. Hello.
Yes,
It's
ma'am.
audible.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
I'm stopping my bit.
Yes.
So actually, what is the one thing which I like to focus is the endometrial thickness and the pattern, because it is fibroid that may be dealt with anything. Right and large ovary, it is less than 5 centimeters, so we can be quite comfortable if it is not septate or something. But the endometrial pattern, if it is constantly thickened, if it is showing cystic spaces, it is ill-defined, then
9
the
millimeter.
first thing what I do, what we have,
Ma'am, it was
what
9
we want
millimeter
to do,
clear
am I
endometrium.
audible?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible, but endometrium was 9 millimeter clear
It is,
endometrium,
it is
and it was not
9
irregular.
millimeter.
Yes,
Is
healthy.
it, even if
52
it
years.
is now, it is one thing that, if it is 9 millimeter and she is having menorrhagia and she is 42 years, then I will first go for the endometrial aspiration, because that is Foxy recommendation, that is FIGO recommendation, that if it is thickened and thick, endometrial biopsy or the aspiration, whatever way you do, it should be there. Then you say what we will recommend
Yes, ma'am. So, ma'am,
drugs or surgery. Then this is my is the
so
this
endometrium
thing,
was simple.
what is fibroid? Yes,
Ma'am, endometrium was
simple proliferation.
endometrium, and there was no hyperplasia, no atypical cells. So, what should be the next?
So my choice will be the medical management of fibroid, and we were initially using more ulipristal and now fibroprist. And my first choice is fibroprist, that is 25 milligram, and I will like to have a watch after 3 months. For the ovary size, that has to be taken care of, as well as the what is the symptomology. As far as after medical management, fibroid size doesn't disappear much on the ultrasound, but somehow proliferative capacity also reduces. So ultrasound follow-up and the medical management. Usually in these patients, first line treatment, I don't give GnRH agonist, and neither I do surgery for these patients. So let's see what the patient, how patient behave in next 3 months. That is my like the see to it, whether she has amenorrhea or she is having very little bleeding, and what happens after 3 months. So any panelist for their opinion, how they take these patients.
Dr. Parul?
Yeah, in this case, see, we take fibroid of 3 centimeters a cutoff for medical management, but it is 4 centimeters, so it is borderline. The endometrium is fine. You said 9 millimeter in a perimenopausal patient, 9 millimeters, all right, and the endometrial hyperplasia is not there, and the Pupil biopsy showed normal.
Yes,
And the enlarged ovary is also less than 5 centimeter. So after workup of the patient, otherwise also like any high risk factors for any other problem, I would like to give her Mirena. That would reduce the size of fibroid also. That would reduce the size of the enlarged ovary also. And we would see her after 6 months if she is responding. In between, we would tell her that Mirena would cause you problem in the first 4 months at least, maybe 6 months, and after that it would be better.
So there are no risk of having a malignancy or any other thing in future.
We've already ruled it out by endometrial biopsy, and less than 5 centimeter, you don't need to do anything else. Maybe a CA-125 can be done.
But literature says that endometrial
CA-125 a little because let CA-125 in 42 years. I really like to have this discussion
52,
because
52,
that is
52. She said
she is 52. So she is 52. She is not 42. She is 52.
52 years, ma'am.
So CA-125 in this large ovary, actually what you say, Parul, for what cutoff you say, because that is the thing actually create a lot of controversy all over the scientific world.
I agree, ma'am.
So Parul, what you say for the cutoff for the CA-125 in the simple ovarian cyst, even in 52?
Less than 200 is for malignancy. Less than 200 is for malignancy.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
it is not recommended in this case. It is a simple enlarged ovary. But otherwise, if you are very doubtful about or the patient is very doubtful, then we can get it done and just allay her fear. That is all.
Yes, it was done. CA-125, everything was done. Ultimately, we did hysterectomy for this patient because she was not ready to take any chances. And MRI was suggesting endometriotic cyst, and it turned out to be a simple corpus luteal cyst on histopathology. But that was what was done for this patient actually, because
so
patients.
That is what happens is less than 5 centimeters.
Again,
Yes, ma'am.
Again, Seema, I will say that MRI imaging are getting like not too much matlab abused. Actually,
Yes,
we
ma'am.
don't have any additional information. It is
Agreed.
such a costly investigation, and all over all ultrasound association, radiologist association has warned. It is the simplest, even for a little, because 95% of the cysts are benign, and they have advocated in their society that we should not go for the MRI that frequently because it adds to the knowledge very, very little. So there is one takeaway because we have a good number of attendance and we want to be medicine very patient friendly, what we can say.
Yes, ma'am.
So
Agreed, ma'am. Totally agreed, ma'am. You have used Ulipristal and all, but we have seen lots of side effects in our patient, and we have in fact stopped using it. So, what is your experience with the side effects of treating fibroids with these drugs? And they are not effective. I have not seen any size reducing with these drugs, maybe 10% or maybe nothing, and no significant improvement in our infertility patients also where we give these drugs. I mean, I strongly believe that they should not be given, ma'am. Please share.
actually, my experience is actually, I can say to the other spectrum, Ulipristal is also a very good drug, though there is a like it is a rarest of rares that it cause any liver injury. So if anybody is giving Ulipristal, watch on the liver function test. Pre-prescribing and post-prescribing is important, and the fibroprist. Actually, what happens, a patient such type, because it is menorrhagia and the menstrual bleeding which is troubling the patient. And in 1 to 2 cycle, after 1 to 2 cycle, what we say in this age group, patient have amenorrhea. In 50, 48, above 45, patient have amenorrhea, and she is quite relieved. What we say, ultrasound picture remains almost same, but we see there is no like change in the, there is no increase in size, and somehow I believe that the proliferative capacity of the fibroid gets lost, and majority of patients go very well on the 3 month cycle of fibroprist, and they don't need hysterectomy because they are in the 52 years age, their menstruation does not come back. But we have to have a watch, at least I can say 2 ultrasound at 6 month interval for the cyst as well as the fibroid, because late onset increase of fibroid is cumbersome. So my experience with the medical management is very, very pretty good, and we avoid with the simple drug, very friendly thing. LNG IUCD is also option, but it doesn't. It has got a initial menstrual disturbance, but these drugs don't have. So my experience is very, very remarkable, like choice in the perimenopausal age group, especially. Parul and Charu, we will like to have your experience about
Dr.
these
Parul,
drugs
please,
also.
please add.
Nahi.
Dr. Parul, you would like to add anything to what ma'am has said? Dr. Parul, you have to unmute yourself, Dr. Parul. Yes.
Agree with ma'am, but either hysterectomy or LNG IUS would be my preference in this case.
Yes, even we prefer that because we stopped using these drugs, but we will go with, I mean, it's worth sharing ma'am's experience, and we would give a second thought to using it
No,
again.
there are lots of paper. Seema, there are lots of paper for a very good like this thing. And FIGO recommended. FIGO, am I audible?
Yes.
FIGO recommends even what you say. I don't use in infertility, but FIGO recommends it that give the 3 month medical treatment. See whether the even for the submucous myoma cavity obliteration, and see that the patient gets so FIGO recommendation 2018, and all there are wonderful paper from the Indian as well as abroad that these drugs are quite effective in fibroid and the situation like this. So I think we can have a more experience, and LNG IUS, of course, there is always a good choice, always a good choice. And GnRH agonist is one option. So I will like to have opinion of Parul as well as I think chairperson को भी हम लोग use कर लेते हैं
Dr.
Seema.
Sunita, you want to add this?
Present. Yes. So that we have more opinions. Yes.
Dr. Sunita, you would like to add?
I would agree with the Parul ma'am. I would definitely use the Mirena and keep the patient on follow up. The ovarian cyst is size is below 5 centimeters, so there is no worry for it. So we can follow the patient for ovarian cyst and for fibroid also after putting the Mirena. session.
Right. Thank you. So
Any opinion for GnRH agonist? GnRH agonist you have put na this question. So I
ma'am,
like to
in
have the
fertility
experience.
IVF
GnRH.
patients, I have given it to some patients and it does help. Like size.
Ah.
Seema, you're not audible. Seema.
I think there is some internet issue.
Yes.
Dr. Seema, if you would like, could you rejoin, ma'am? Rejoin kar lijiye. Do we go to the next question?
Deepika, I think you go on with.
Yeah, I go to the next question. 40 years female with left ovarian cyst. I would not know what she wanted to ask, but then I'm just reading it out.
Yeah,
50.
okay.
Okay.
Ma'am would take the question.
Yeah.
Yes.
Will you go
I'll
for
read out the
conservative or
question. Dr.
surgical
Sadhna
treatment?
Gupta may take the question.
Yes.
40 years
So
female,
she's,
left ovarian cyst 15.4 into 14.5 centimeters, separate multilocular septate hoga ye.
septate hoga ye.
Will
Yes.
you go for conservative or surgical treatment, hysterectomy or only cystectomy? This is a real scenario. So she wanted to ask what to do in this patient.
Right. Sorry, ma'am, my connection was out. So yes, please tell. Dr. Sadhna, ma'am, please share your views on this question.
So she is 40 year, 15.4, 14.5 centimeters. Now, this is the thing actually where we iota classification. She is adnexal mass more than 10 centimeter, and it is a real worry for us. So it is a very less narrow picture. We want to have now this patient a full history of any breast cancer, any ovarian or endometrial malignancy in the family. We will have to have a detailed ultrasound pictures. It might be given because iota classification. Now the International Ovarian Tumor classification gives beautiful, very simple thing for the benign and the malignant. And if there is any one thing like ascites, like more than 7 centimeter papillary projection, then we should refer it to the gynae oncologist. And of course, the tumor marker CA125 is a must. And in this CA125, and we can have go for the HE4 also sometimes if it is available, because HE4 does not actually relate with the menopausal status, menopausal or perimenopausal. So this patient actually, it is before going any treatment, we will like to have a very good all clinical profile, family history, very important. Then the iota classification, then the malignancy index, and if there is any doubt about malignancy, it is always preferred better to shift to the oncology unit. And if it is not, when it is not coming out to malignant, then you will go for the cystectomy or hysterectomy. Now this is again a very tricky question, because if the patient is having any history of, like, if she is obese, if she is hypertensive, it is diabetic, I will go for the hysterectomy. No way that we are again going for the endometrial thickness and all things. But if she is very low profile, then we can think that we can do cystectomy, or we can do like one oophorectomy is quite okay. But today's conservation, but if, and the third thing what I say, that our patients are compliant. Few patients, the patient, large majority of population people don't want to come to doctor again and again with the fear in their head of the psych, this thing. So the patient choices is always there, patient profile is there. Any high risk person for the endometrial malignancy, I am not going to going for hysterectomy. Patient not compliant, we will go for hysterectomy. And anyway, and the not cystectomy for this is 15.4, 14.5. I am going to have the oophorectomy for that thing. So it will be my takeaway. And always take full profile. It is patient is not ultrasound picture, it is genetics, it is her total clinical profile. Actually, like in this patient, what was again endometrial thickness we want to know. If it is more than 10, more than 11, then there is no way that we go only for cystectomy. So this is my way. And I think chairs, let's join chairs also as a panelist.
Dr. Parul,
Parul, what's your takeaway?
Ma'am, absolutely right. No role of conservative management in this case. And I would like to go for hysterectomy along with unilateral or bilateral self-paying oophorectomy in this case, followed by ERT if possible. That is different. But MRI has a role in this case because it is a huge multilocular cyst, and the RMI index and the IOTA index, both of them, it's falling into the malignant group maybe. So CA-125, LDH, CEA, everything has to be done, and very clearly in your mind that what is it? High risk factors for ovarian malignancy has to be considered in this, and it is better, and maybe previous surgeries has to be considered, because if you do a oophorectomy at one stage and then hysterectomy at a later stage, that would be more detrimental to her.
Right.
So it is better to do hysterectomy with bilateral self-paying oophorectomy in this case. I would like to add one more thing. When I was reading about the cases, that ovarian, fallopian tube and peritoneal cancers, because all these things arise from the same duct in the initial stages. So these occur, these have a similar incidence of happening in ovarian, fallopian tube and peritoneal cancer. So even after removing the ovaries, you can have an ovarian cancer-like picture. Also, after you removing the uterus, there are a 40% reduction in the case of ovarian cancer. The theory is not yet still known, maybe because of retrograde menstruation. So when you remove the uterus, when you conserve the ovaries, you can remove the tubes as well to reduce the chances of fallopian tube carcinoma, as well as reduce the chances of ovarian cancer.
Right. Even
Actually, Parul, I will like to just differentiate the people between it. That the risk reduction self-oophorectomy, what we say, and the risk reduction self-injectomy. So one point is you do self-injectomy when you are doing opportunistic surgery, like you are doing tubal ligation, don't do tubal ligation, you do self-injectomy. You are doing hysterectomy, you preserve ovary, but you do the self-injectomy. That is opportunistic.
Yes.
And one is the high risk situation. And in high risk situation, like the patient having genetic mutation or family history, the situation is entirely different. And in those cases, the reduction of self-oophorectomy. So the two situations are different, but as a gynecologist, we should have this thing in mind. If the patient is having opportunistic surgery, and we should tell the advantage of doing self-injectomy so that it reduces the risk of ovarian carcinoma. So these two things are a little different and demand a little more analysis for these things.
Yes.
Dr. Sunita, do you differ from ma'am? Because even I would like to go for
Yes.
hysterectomy and bilateral salping oophorectomy, because our scenario is different. When we get patients from rural areas, they want just one go surgery. And even when we leave ovaries otherwise normal also, and they develop cyst in near future, they come and ask us what was done when you have left the ovaries behind.
Okay,
So
ma'am.
we have to really counsel them at length. And for this particular patient, I would be on the safer side and go for hysterectomy with bilateral, not leaving the other ovary also, because all said and done, she can have a malignancy also in this particular ovary, and in future also she can develop. So, Dr. Sunita, do you differ from us, or you want to add anything?
I'll go with this hysterectomy with bilateral salping oophorectomy. Both the ovaries should be removed.
Right, Sadhna ma'am, can we
Yes,
proceed?
please.
Right,
And we have got a very challenging question, Seema. I think they should be tackled at the end of panel. Very good question I'm seeing in chat box. Stimulating questions, really.
right. I have told Dr. Sunita to keep the questions. Ma'am, you can take it right away if you are really feeling good.
No, please, let's finish the panel. So
Okay, so next question. Can we have the next question, please? Yes. So next question is, what should be the upper limit? This is a question from one of the panelists also, and I think we have discussed about it.
Yeah,
So we,
discussed
if
it.
55 is the upper limit, all the panelists, ma'am, Sadhna
No.
ma'am, Dr.
It is, yes, upper limit, it is around 50, what we say, around 13 years before menopause, the follicular reserve started depleting. Almost 7 to 8 years, we can say minimum. So around from 37 to 38 to 51 years, that take completion of menopause before early cycles, then anovulatory bleedings, then menopause. So in Asian ethnicity, we say 51 almost, and there is no upper limit per se, and it depends upon the, under one thing, what WHI study, which I want to like communicate, that majority, more than 70 to 80% of women are neutral or okay with menopause. So we have to be very careful that maybe we get patient only and we don't roam in the people, healthy people. And I am really very careful about it that as a physician, we don't make adolescent and menopause a disease. It is a normal aging process. Heart attacks, osteoporosis is not due to menopause, it is due to aging, and so many factors come out. And we have to think the patient should age gracefully, like we all are like doing it. So that is a one very important message. Don't make adolescent pathological, don't make menopause pathological. It is the prime beauty of period of like every human being. So let's see.
So,
It is
ma'am, late menopause should not cause any worry according to you. Sometimes patients come at 57 also. I get really
No.
worried.
I say I was worried. I initially said with the Jadip that I am always worried that if she is 55, she is still menstruating, that I will really like to have what is her BMI, what is her diabetic. I screen for thyroid, diabetes, and the endometrial thickness. And we are really worried. And endometrial thickness need, and the ovarian, like what is the size of ovary, that need regular good workup for these. It is a worried. If it is more than 55, 56, it is a thing of worry, and we should have a proper workup for these patients.
Dr. Parul, same. According to literature, it says that if the menopause is occurring, even if up till 60 plus, you don't have to worry if there is patient is menstruating normally. And I've seen patients menstruating normally even at 58, 59 with no comorbidity, and she's menstruating, she has no problem. Only she should be screened regularly. That is all. No need of
Actually,
no need
these are the patient women, Parul, who was having a high estrogen content in some way. So the fat is the source of estrogen, and whatever literature say, no literature can replace any experience. Our Asian ethnicity is not for for a menopause around 45 to 51 years. And I don't say that we should take away that it's okay. We need actually 6 monthly endometrial thickness, ultrasound scan, and of course the all workup, thyroid and everything, and the comorbidities. So
I agree, surveillance has to be done.
yes, it is not an indication of hysterectomy.
Advantage of menopause. Late menopause has more advantages than disadvantage. The disadvantage is only cancer, which occurs in very few patients, and the advantage is saving from cardiac disease, saving from mood changes, saving from osteoporosis, saving from cognitive imbalance of the patient and sleep disorders. Everything is saved. But so breast should be under surveillance and no need for hysterectomy or
no need of hysterectomy, but a good workup.
Dr. Parul, one thing I want to share my fears with you all is that I have seen at least 3 patients who have got now breast cancer. They are 60
Yes.
and they have a small fibroid also, all of them, 3 of them, and they had one cyst also at 62. So they have undergone hysterectomy also and lumpectomy and whatever the treatment. And they were all sort of late menopause, I would say. One was infertility treated and she had received so many injections. So my concern is that more estrogen will save from heart attack and everything, which can be prevented otherwise also. So that means a TH with BSO should be done in any patient going beyond 55. No, not at all. Any case, she would have a breast cancer. No, but then what are the, like, are there, we will come to next question, because I want that there should be some parameter which can say that you will not have breast cancer. So let us have menses till 60, 65. So what are the chances of developing malignancy if ovaries are left behind in hysterectomy in postmenopausal women? So any predictors to specify the risk? That is my concern, because one of our doctors only, she had hysterectomy at 52 and written consent was taken from her. She said, don't remove my ovaries. And then at 56, 4 years later, she had breast cancer. Till then, there was no family history of breast cancer. Now her sister also has breast cancer after 6 years. But till the time she got her hysterectomy, there was absolutely no family history. So my concern is, when she's menopausal or perimenopausal, should we leave ovaries behind or we remove uterus? So inputs from Sadhna ma'am, Dr. Parul.
देखो, अगर if what we say in a general population, chances of malignancy is 0.1 to 0.75%. If it is a general population, like no family history and nothing else. Now, in the last 10 years, this is the thing, it is incidence. But in last 10 to 15 years, so much rise of breast cancer in our country is actually alarming.
Right,
And
ma'am.
what we say that what you shared this thing, and I see don't only malignancy, she a lot of problem when we leave ovary, like ovarian cyst, dyspareunia. And one thing, it may be benign cyst, but on ultrasound it is the cyst which is sometime there, and we have to do the laparotomy because cyst is going 10 to 15 centimeters. So it is one thing, because now the people, and anyway, one again I will say from the my all over the life experience as well as the studies as well, even if we retain the ovary, after 2 to 3 years the ovarian function will wane off. In 52 years age already the ovarian function is waning off. Matlab you can do FSH, LH or whatever it is, already in the 50 years already it is waning off. So what advantage we are going to retain with the ovary? And I strongly like have a doubt on this thing that all osteoporosis, all heart disease, all problem are due to only lack of estrogen. I will say it is overall aging, and a person who have lived well in his life, I don't see what I say that is this the research that 80 to 85% women are neutral, or they are more happy with the menopause. So if you have done a good life, you have no worry, because there is not only menopause, na, it is estrogen, it is बच्चों का career, they have left the home, loneliness, you have retirement, you have less income. So many things are there. The husband has got heart attack. So many things are there which actually cause the sleep disturbance. And I will say, as a doctor, as a human being, that if you want to have a good menopausal life, then live well in your young age. And if you have a satisfied soul, you are not going to have any sleep pattern. You are going to have. So medicine is not only uterus and ovary, and I strongly believe that woman is also not uterus and ovary. She is a complete human being, and as a medical person we should have a like a broader outlook about the health. So in these 52 years, leaving ovaries may not be beneficial or not, but of course sometimes it gives a lot of trouble as a clinician. So
Should be
that is
removed, ma'am.
the-
It's very, very comforting, ma'am, your words, because before this we had webinar on menopause and we were all, like, oh my God, if we lose ovary, we will lose everything. So now you're comforting and it's really good. Dr. Parul?
It is just because it is said that ovaries should be preserved, because ovaries keep on producing testosterone and androstenedione, which converts into estrogen into fat, in fat. Okay. So that is what some amount of estrogen is conserved in the body even after hysterectomy. But in this postmenopausal women, I would like to remove the ovaries if there are any of the ovarian cancer predictors, high risk for ovarian cancers are there, early menopause, early menarche, late menopause, family history, or age of the patient is more than 60 years, or BRCA1, if anybody can afford and if anybody is aware of it and they want to discuss and get it done, the mutations can be checked.
So one question here, ma'am, Dr. Sadhana, ma'am, is ovary is the only source of estrogen, or something comes from adrenal also after menopause, or it's all over? Little bit.
no, there are, nature has been so generous that it like replenish. And what we say, we are now again as a medicine people, we are like after BMI is something, but actually a little gain of weight, that is estrogen. It is not a high BMI, it is not obesity. But when we say that, I always thought that a little, like we see in the grandmother and the something, that is the source, and the adrenal is their source, and it is the from the liver as well, from the liver as well as we get the estrogen. So estrogen is not only from the ovarian function, and we have got, the nature is so intelligent and generous that we have testosterone, we have estrogen, everything is in us, and not at all agree that ovary is the only source of estrogen.
We can blush at 50 plus also, ma'am, then.
Of course we are.
So we can have the next question, ma'am. Next question. Guidelines for removing ovaries while operating prolapse patient, ma'am, because till date on prolapse patient, I had never removed ovaries, or if they were coming on my way. But recently I had a patient who had formed a cyst after a prolapse surgery, and she's already 57 years and surgery was done, I think, some 2 years back. So I'm really not comfortable with the idea. So tell us what is to be done.
Actually, what I say that again, now this is the time. If the patient has got, usually we don't take history still now, but now this is one thing which we have to set the like change the mindset that for every woman who is coming around the perimenopause or 40 years, or even that anybody is the, sometimes everything is fine and patient says nahi nahi ye kar lijiye wo kar lijiye, and then you say, because there has been one death from the cancer in the family or in the knowledgeable. So family history is very, very important. And again, I say, if there is a pathological cyst we have seen in ultrasound in prolapse patient vaginal hysterectomy, we can do very easily adnexectomy. If you have to give a little curved clamps, long curved clamps and a little traction from the above, and we can do it. And what we say, the opportunistic salpingectomy, this has come out in a big way as a preventive measure against ovarian cancer. It is the salpingectomy, like from femoral end to the uterotubal junction, you can cut it off, and it has got a protective effect on the development of ovarian malignancy in a population as a whole. So if the ultrasound says, it usually sometimes 4-degree prolapse, 3rd-degree prolapse, we don't even do ultrasound. But if we are doing it and we got a cyst, better to be take care of it. It may be hydrosalpinx as well. It is not ovarian cyst, it is hydrosalpinx, and then the patient comes with the PID. So it is a good thing that we can do a scan, we counsel, take overall picture, and if possible, we can do opportunistic salpingectomy, and that requires also a little bit surgical skill. It is like you don't want to disturb the blood supply to the ovary, and how to do. So that also required training. But yes, of course, in prolapse patient, a good ultrasound family history decide that whether you want to remove only salpingectomy or salpingo-oophorectomy and other issues also. Like chronic PID is also common with us. So bilateral hydrosalpinx, thick adnexa, then why to leave them? It is not only malignancy. So Parul and chairpersons.
Chairperson is gone. But Dr. Jaideep Tang would have been the best to answer this because he's saying vaginal surgery for all patients.
I think, do we agree with that, Dr. Parul and Dr. Sadhana?
No, no, it depends upon your skill. Actually, we don't say that it is always vaginal hysterectomy, but of course, few people, like I am from that college, SN Medical College, Agra, which has like pioneered vaginal hysterectomy from a long time, since Dr. Naval Kishore, Dr. Ramesh Chandra, and we have seen it, and we are also quite comfortable it. But for a very, very difficult hysterectomy, like no descent and a thick adhesion or a big uterus, then it becomes a real tricky issue, especially when over the time we are having less and less hysterectomy because of wonderful medical drugs and all the things. So it is not possible for all, but of course we have to be careful about what we are removing and in what way. Approach is something different issue actually.
Right, ma'am. So we have the next question. Deepika ji, yes, basic guidelines. So I think we have discussed that
Yes,
past 40 years of age, should we retain ovaries or we should not? Parul ji, Dr. Parul, aap बताइए.
Basic guidelines for retaining uterus in ovarian pathology. It all depends on the risk factors of ovarian cancer and uterine cancer and endometrial cancer. And beyond 45, I think
better to remove.
Beyond 50 is the cutoff line, because at 50 usually the postmenopause is attained in Indian population. So at 50 we can take a take-home message that after 50 we can remove it always. 45 to 50 we have to counsel the patient and take her consent. What would she want to? If she's already menopausal at 45, then we can
just remove them.
Just remove them, or at least tell the patient.
Option can be given. So you say that 45 it is optional with no added pathology. We can think of leaving the ovaries behind. At 50 mandatorily we have to remove. And 45, ma'am, Sadhna ma'am.
But everybody has to take in.
अगेन एक्चुअली जो क्वेश्चन है ना वो बहुत ब्रॉड है
हाँ,
असल में,
बहुत broad है.
और इस तरह से बिकॉज इन BRCA1 एंड BRCA2 म्यूटेशन कैरियर्स, और अभी हम लोग बहुत पेशेंट्स को इस तरह से देख रहे हैं कि फैमिली में जैसे फादर को कोलन कार्सिनोमा हुआ, ये तो व्हेन BRCA1 BRCA2 म्यूटेशन कैरियर, हिस्ट्री ऑफ कैंसर्स इन फर्स्ट रिलेटिव और टू रिलेटिव. Now, for those, the recommendation is as soon as childbearing is complete, you do salpingo-oophorectomy. So this is we cannot have any basic guideline for it, because it is the guideline is actually is varied according to different patterns. अच्छा, इसमें दो सवाल है. रिटेनिंग यूट्रस इन ओवेरियन पैथोलॉजी. Now, if we are removing one ovary, it's fine. But if we are removing both ovaries, then anyway we are not going to have any advantage of retaining, and we have to see for the cervical cancer again, because patient is active and the so ovary and uterus are interdependent. If you have no uterus, you leave ovary, in 1 or 2 or 3 years the ovary function is going to wane. If we are having no ovary and uterus, then you are not going to have any advantage, and the patient is troubling with all organs, with the fear of like with the cytology and everything. So I think the question is also very broad, and actually so it is difficult to answer, but I think I have put my point for this.
Definitely, ma'am. Ma'am, you're such a precious jewel. Knowing you was so much pleasure and privilege. Actually, I know Dr. Parul knows a lot and she works so much for the topic, but it was really good to have you today for all the answers and queries. And I request Dr. Sunita to take some questions from the chat box if they are there. Dr. Sunita, yes.
Yes. There is
We
a
have another
question.
10 minutes. Yes, yes, yes.
There is a question in the chat box from Dr. Agarwal asking, please opine on the use of Cevista in AUB. Use of Cevista.
It is very good drug. Again, I will say for abnormal uterine bleeding in adolescent and menopausal, perimenopausal age group. I've worked a lot for this thing. Very cheap drug. Very comfortable, very compliant. It is twice a week for 60 milligram. Then after 3 months, once a week. Very well tolerated. And if we have excluded, we have done endometrial biopsy, or we have a very, very normal ultrasound in a good age group, it is one drug of choice which can really work. And again, the symptoms are the same, like the patient have amenorrhea and very scanty period, and patient are very much satisfied.
Agreed,
So for
Dr. Parul, you
But
agree?
sometimes ovarian cyst and endometrial hyperplasia may occur because of this, and that there is
We have
problem,
not
ma'am.
seen. I find it very effective. Maybe.
No, but endometrial hyperplasia and ovarian cyst do occur with Cevista.
Okay.
So that causes a problem. Ma'am will tell better.
So we should be on
Actually-
watch.
No, it is not endometrial. Actually, what we say, even with the fibropris, not with the fibropris, with the ulipistol, it also occurs. What it says that the progesterone-induced endometrial change. So it has never been found malignant, but whenever we do any biopsy or we interpret ultrasound finding, the recommendation are that we should write that this patient is on ulipistol or when in with the Centromed. So Parul is right. Sometimes it causes a small cyst formation, a little bit endometrial thickening. But in most of my practice, I have found the thin endometrium. On the contrary, with the especially with the Cevista, with the Centromed, with especially not with the this thing ulipistol.
Right, ma'am. So, Dr. Sunita, any more questions? We can take 2 or 3 questions.
Yeah, 2-3 questions are there, ma'am. There is a question from Dr. Ramni. How about spread of malignant cells through hysteroscopy in suspected CA endometrium?
Very good.
Ramli, this is a very good question, and actually what I like interrupted Jaydeep, what you are going to achieve with hysteroscopy.
Yes.
From the very beginning, it is my concern that hysteroscopic installation of fluid can spread out because we have a good pressure to see the visualization. And Ramani, in the last 3 or 4 studies are questioning about the risk for the spread of endometrial malignancy, though they say it may be minimal. But there cannot be the foolproof because we cannot control it. So, Ramni, your question is very well taken by the scientific world also, and for the common sense also. So, that is the thing. We don't have final answer, but there is minimal risk of spread.
Very valid question.
Anyway, people biopsy is supposed to be the best nowadays.
Best. best.
Dr. Sunita, next question. Yes.
Yes, there is a question from Dr. Khanam. Please suggest a treatment of a 20-year nulliparous unmarried with menorrhagia since 2 years, progressively increasing USG. USG shows endometrial polyp 2 into 2 centimeter at the fundus of the uterus. Unmarried nulliparous 20-year-old with menorrhagia. Endometrial polyp 2 in
Nora,
at the
this
fundus.
So, so if actually, if you have tried, actually, again, I say one point that when we consider endometrial polyp, endometrial hyperplasia and submucosal fibroid, that requires, really gives us a tricky thing. And sometimes we need 2 or 3 just post-menstrual scan to see that it is a polyp only, because it is not endometrial hyperplasia. My thing is that we call in the 3rd or 4th day of menstruation, so that the endometrial is shaved off and we are not confused with the normal endometrial. First thing. Secondly, in the adolescent girl, in our setup, we have to, even if it is a diagnosed polyp, we have to give first initially the progesterone treatment, so that it can like have a good endometrium and the like amelioration of the symptom. But if she's persistent polyp is there and patient is not at all relieved, then we can say even in nullipara we can do polypectomy as well. It is no, matlab, nowadays girls come out, and if she is not relieved, it's a simple thing. It is polypectomy is very, very simple thing, 1-step procedure. So if you counsel well and they get agree to it.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am.
Dr. Sunita, yes, one more question.
Yes, so there is a one more question, quite big. 53-year-old female with previous 2 LACs with fibroids, adenomyosis, had Mirena insertion 5 years back. Now got perimenopausal bleeding per vaginum after 6 months of amenorrhea. Got Mirena removed under hysteroscopy guidance, uterine cavity normal, ET 6 mm prior to hysteroscopy guided DNC. HPE, it's secretory endometrium. What she is B plan? Patient does not want hysterectomy.
We can put her on drug
If she has bleeding after
We
6
can
months of
reinsert. Yes,
amenorrhea,
we can. Yes,
Yes.
we can.
53.
We can
We can
wait.
We
We
can
can put her on
reinsert.
drug treatment, ma'am, and we can do TCRA also for such patients if it is persistent bleeding.
What she says, she is having fibroid ना multiple.
fibroid
Fibroid
adenomyosis.
है, TCRE से कुछ नहीं होने वाला है.
Hysterectomy should be done.
Actually, hysterectomy should be done, and it is now what a confusing world it has become. It is internet which says menopause is a disease. It is doctors which say menopause is a disease, and their opinions are not framed by them. They are being like overpowered by something. So as a doctor, when we say that it is one-time procedure, it is less costly. You don't need to have a follow-up. You have a good quality of life. Then it is also doing hysterectomy is not a crime. Something it is sometimes really a very well thoughtful decision for it.
But
And
ma'am,
again, LNG IUD अगर आपको नहीं चाहिए तो ठीक है, you can reinsert LNG IUD as well.
Yes,
Or
ma'am.
you,
she
हाँ,
is
Seema,
6 months she has amenorrhea, so maybe the fibroids will also shrink little bit with amenorrhea, and
Yeah, that
we
is
can
what I
give
was
her another
saying.
amenorrhea now for yes.
and again, Sunita, I will say,
Yes.
if the patient is having ultrasound pathology and she is having recurring symptoms, we should be very careful about it.
Yes.
Whatsoever is ultrasound finding, whatsoever is biopsy finding, there are issues with it. And if she's having recurrence of symptom, we should be a little careful about it. And we cannot leave it that always we are also like bound to the conservative. We
have
should
had
be very
patients-
careful about it.
Yes, ma'am. One patient was ovarian malignancy, and other turned out to be endometrial malignancy with these symptoms, these kind of symptoms.
Yes. It's not biopsy is not ये नहीं कह सकते कि it is always and always we are able to diagnose. Always positive predictive values, specificity, sensitivity. We have all these terms now.
Next question.
All questions are answered, ma'am. Remaining
Okay,
questions.
so we conclude this session. It was really good to have you, Sadhna ma'am, and most wonderful and evidence-based discussion. Thank you for sparing your valuable time, and we look forward to many more meetings with you. And we thank Jaideep Tanksa for the wonderful presentation and Dr. Parul Gupta for affirmative answers on all the questions. And we look forward to again meeting you. Thank you, Dr. Sunita. Thank you, Dr. Surekha. Thank you, Deepika ji and Dr. Vipin Tyagi ji. And we request Dr. Deepika to thank on behalf of Jackson Pal for organizing such wonderful webinar and adding to our knowledge. And I think it was beneficial to all, because I have started getting messages from the audience that it is a most wonderful and interactive session. So I am really indebted to my faculty.
अब सुनो एक मैं डॉक्टर पूनम गुप्ता का क्वेश्चन पढ़ूं सुनीता. उसने कहा my question is not answered.
Just a minute.
So Deepika, wait a little. Yes, Poonam Gupta says my question not answered. So
Ma'am Gupta, if a patient perimenopausal age have history of something coming out of vagina and on PS examination elongated posterior lip of cervix, uterus size normal, USG and how normal on USG, and how to manage the patient.
Read it
so
again.
if she is having having prolapse symptom, then first of all again the cytology and everything, because if sometime erosion is there, and if she is having problem, actually prolapse surgery what is, if the patient is having problem with her quality of life, then only surgery is the thing, because nothing can change the prolapse thing. If the patient is having no problem, then there is no issue of quality of life, then the routine screening and everything. This is my takeaway. Parul, what you say to Dr.
Agree, ma'am, agree.
Time is
Thank you for being agree. Thank you.
If it has contraindication to surgery, then a pessary can be tried. That is all.
That's
we can do have a call for something like we remove just cervix and
Or some pexy can be tried. Some pessary can be tried if she has contraindication.
but
to
it is
surgery.
hypertrophied posterior lip, she said. So ma'am is right that cytology is to be done. Why it is hypertrophied at this age?
Yeah, in all cases, in LBC, TVS, mammography, and everything is mandatory in all cases. We have not discussed investigation in any case, but then it is mandatory.
Thank you, ma'am. It was such a wonderful discussion. Over to you, Dr. Deepika. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, all the experts present with us today. Jackson Pal brings you Cyclorex CR10, norethistron acetate 10 mg with embedded polymer matrix technology. We also have Jepitone iron syrup enriched with zinc and vitamin B, helps you to say no to anemia, and progesterone sustained release tablets as Divagest SR 200 and 300. My teammates, Dr. Vipin Tyagi and Mr. Amit Saxena, join me to thank all the esteemed faculty present with us today. And we hope to see you again in our next webinar, which will be on 28th of Feb, adenomyosis and endometriosis recent updates, 12 p.m. onwards. So thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Sadhna, ma'am.